Hi, this is Carrie Brownstein.
This is DJ Premier.
This is Darren Aronofsky.
You got the RZA right here.
Rose McGowan.
Radiohead.
Aisha Tyler.
Tribe Called Quest.
Fred Armisen.
Prince Paul.
Javier Munoz. Seth Meyers.
Frankie Cosmos.
Flying Lotus.
Hi, we're Chaim, and you're listening to the Talkhouse Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Talkhouse Podcast. I'm Josh Modell. On this week's episode, we've got a pair of songwriters who come from different scenes but whose convergence sparked a longtime friendship and even some collaboration. David Wax and Will Oldham. Now, David Wax is half the core of the band that bears his name, David Wax Museum. The other half is his wife and longtime musical partner, Suze Slezak. The duo has been making records and touring the world for the past 15 years or so, largely independently and definitely marching to the beat of their own drummer. Their blend of Mexican-flavored folk and other traditional-sounding influences has been called Mexo-Americana, but that's really just a starting place. It's charming, engaging, and always searching. David Wax Museum's latest album is called You Must Change Your Life, and it was inspired by both a health scare that Wax had recently and by their choice of producer, Dan Malad, who's a member of Lucius, among other major accomplishments. Check out a little bit of the title track from You Must Change Your Life, right here.
Going through the motions, trying to pay the bills. Nothing too fancy, wearing shirts with less frills. Nothing's really clicking, you're in a funk. Feeling like an iceberg that just lost a chunk. You must change your life.
Now, perhaps from that song, you can hear how Wax might get along with today's other guest, Will Oldham. Oldham is, of course, known as the songwriting genius behind Palace Music and Bonnie Prince Billy, and he's been making timeless songs since the early 1990s. His latest album is a collaboration with Bill Callahan called Blind Date Party. Oldham is also an actor, which is touched on in this conversation. You may have seen him in one of Kelly Reichardt's movies or in A Ghost Story, which, if you haven't seen it, please do. It's amazing. In this conversation, Wax and Oldham talk about how they were able to connect at a folk festival. They talk about how Oldham exists sort of outside the machinery of the music business and how that's helped and occasionally hurt, but mostly helped. They touch on the rare songs that Oldham has licensed for film and TV, and David asks Will to come to he and Suze's barn to play for a blindfolded audience. It'll make sense when you hear it. Enjoy.
Hi, how you been?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Today is very promising. It's warming up. I'm very temperature sensitive. But then over the past few days, we've had a little resurgence of cold temperatures, and my body is just not really into this cold stuff. But today it's getting warm again, and I went to a Qigong class today, or Qigong.
Oh, yes, Suze has been loving her Qigong teacher. That's been like an essential practice for her of late. I can see a difference when she comes back from that class.
Yeah, this guy is really wild, but I think he might live in, sometimes maybe in Sewanee maybe, and just comes to Louisville every couple of weeks to do sound bath stuff. And then if there's room and time, he throws in a Qigong class. It's hilarious, and it was what I needed today. Yeah.
Beautiful.
The last time I saw my wife and child, they were smiling. How about you?
Yeah, everybody's doing well on this end.
I think I just confirmed a show there in the fall.
Oh, really? Oh, wonderful.
Jefferson, is that a theater?
Yeah.
That's where I'm playing, yeah.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, if we're around, we'd love to see you and, of course,
Yeah.
host you here in the barn.
You know, my brother lives there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
I remember.
And we're on good terms right now, so that's awesome.
Great. Oh, so. I'm glad to hear that. Well, just some context for someone that's just like wandering into this conversation, and I just thought talk about maybe when we first met, and like if it's not too embarrassing for you, I can talk about like what it meant to meet you and to get to begin a friendship with you because of my relationship to your music.
Sure.
To that point.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've really talked too much about that with you.
No. No, and it's a kind of amazing to, I was looking at all the liner notes on the record that you just sent, and I was just thinking like how amazing it is that I think other than you and Suze, it's just Alex Spiegelman, and I don't recognize any other names on that. And I was just thinking like, wow, our worlds, we were just fortunate to intersect when and where we did, because otherwise our worlds don't intersect enough.
Yeah, and I think, that's kind of the beauty of those Canadian folk festivals. We met at the Calgary Folk Fest, maybe about 10 years ago. And I think the nature of being at a festival like that, where you're there for a couple days, it's kind of so collaborative in nature, which feels really unique about those festivals. And it's just like an environment where I felt like I could approach you and be like, I'm a fan of your work. I'm so excited to get to see you here.
Yeah.
And then we could keep running into you over the course of the time. And then when I remember like somehow in that environment, I felt like comfortable asking you if you'd sing with us during one of our sets. and like just that you would graciously accept to do that. And I feel really grateful for your friendship in our life from that point on.
Yeah, back at you. I'm not a fan of music festivals in general, as a performer or an audience member, probably primarily because as an audience member, I don't appreciate them. It makes me appreciate them less as a performer. But Calgary, I have such specific and wonderful and important memories from the times that I've been there, which I can't really say about other music festivals.
I've found it with some of the other Canadian folk festivals that there is just a certain vibe to them. And maybe because the nature of these sets where they put a bunch of artists on the same stage and they like expect that everybody will happily cooperate and collaborate, and that's kind of the vibe. It also just like worked out beautifully because you live in Louisville, which is the halfway point between my hometown and Suze's hometown.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like you're the halfway stop there, and we've loved playing Louisville over the years and getting to hang out. I was telling Suze this before we got on. I can remember when I first heard your music because there was a mixtape that was being passed down in my high school. So I heard Fugazi and Tortoise, The Girl from Ipanema, and New Partner.
Excellent.
Was on that mixtape. I can remember going to Salt of the Earth, the little record store in Columbia, Missouri, and trying to find it. And that experience, which maybe a lot of people when they were discovering your music in the 90s had, where it's like, you know, there's no internet at all. So it's just like, I see a bunch of these different records under these different names, under the different palace names, and then got Viva Las Blues. And so it's like this record that I just like, I know so intimately. And I know your voice so intimately from that record. And then to kind of like get to have you collaborate with us and sing our songs when we've come through Louisville over the years. It's just, I mean, it's really on such a deep level, just so gratifying and powerful to kind of like hear this voice I know so well that's been with me for so long as a listener, and then to kind of hear you sing these songs together.
I had a painter come over and he said, he's like, "Oh, I've seen you play one time." Or, it wasn't your show though. It was the David Wax Museum show. And he's like, "I actually have a really good recording of it here on my phone."
Oh, wow.
And he played when you were at the Clifton Center up the street and they sang. That was really awesome.
That's great. Can you remember music like that you heard when you were, in junior high or that age of kind of like, and then people that you've gotten to know later in life?
I had an extraordinary experience yesterday where I got to speak with, one of my biggest in this kind of environment, although she lives in the sticks in England. And so it took months to set up because eventually a portable digital recording device had to be sent to their house because they didn't have they didn't have really reliable internet signal to do something like this. So a woman named June Tabor, who's a singer, and most people don't know her, but she's, I first heard her when I was about 18 or 19. There was a Scottish friend. I asked him to send me some Scottish and Irish music because he knew that stuff. And he sent me 5 90-minute tapes, organized tapes with 7 or 8 pages of notes on everything. And one of the voices that stood out was this woman, June Tabor. And she's remained a hugely important touchstone for me, where like if I finish a record, kind of the first thing I do is just listen to June Tabor for 2 or 3 weeks, whether I'm in the car or at home. And it just kind of resets me and recenters me. I've written her fan letters before. She's never responded. She doesn't play out very much. She's 75. She doesn't think she's going to make another record. May never see her play live again, but I got to speak to her for an hour yesterday, and that was very thrilling. And then another hugely significant one was, there's a bunch of them, but I had Jonathan Richman. Yeah. Because he's somebody I remember learning about in my mid-teens, and I had a picture of him wearing a white leather jacket on my wall of my bedroom when I was a kid, and I loved his music very much. It was really important to me, and now I've traveled with him and hung out with him, and it's been terrific.
That was the last time I've seen you in person. Was the Jonathan Richman show right before the pandemic? It was week basically before everything shut down.
It was kind of like Indiana Jones with the boulder rolling behind him. Shows were being canceled, 3 days ahead, but we still had the next show. But then maybe that one was canceled. We were, having these strategy planning meetings in the lobbies of hotels, which was so surreal to be, sitting there talking to Jonathan Richman about whether or not we should continue the tour. I kept, pinching myself. And it was a funny trip because playing with him, I wanted to do it because we could just travel together and I could watch him, because I know he's even more particular than I am. And I'm, kind of inconveniently particular about a lot of things. And maybe about 2 months later, he called and was like, I realized I never talked to you about your sets, your show. And I was like, yeah. And he gave this detailed critique of the show. And I was like, well, Jonathan, I was kind of like 75% invested in the show because the real reason I was there was just to watch you. So I was holding back in order to just be present for the observation of what you're doing. Because if I was there 100 or 110%, I would not be able to absorb what you were doing. And that was an opportunity I didn't want to miss. He said, well, that's what I was trying to do with you, which is not true because Jonathan doesn't try to observe anybody else. But it was nice of him to say. I was like, no, things are going to go your way or they're not going to happen, Jonathan. You understand that. Like, we'll be at a show and he'll say, like, if that ice machine is on during the show, I'm not performing. And I'm like, well, if you're not performing, then we're not performing. So you could take the whole show down if you want. I'm not going to do that. Yeah. But still, every time I hear from him, it's like, wow. Just, especially because he's also making insanely beautiful records right now, which is the kind of thing that, when you're a fan of somebody when you're younger and 30 years later or 40 years later, they're killing it. You're just like, wow, I feel lucky that I got something right back then.
It was a really nourishing show for me, I think, to like have it be the last one before everything shut down. There was so much there that could sustain me for a long time. I'd never seen Jonathan, before. I think I went in just going like, oh, I'm here just to see my friend Will. And then, to kind of be blown away.
He brings it every time, yeah. Yeah.
To hear him critique your show, did that penetrate in a different way, or did you feel like not that sensitive about it?
I think there's not enough open critique of peers, by peers, or even, honestly, by critics anymore. There's never, I feel like, anything that we could sort of euphemistically call constructive criticism even anymore. And I think we all could benefit from a little more critique. And I know that Jonathan is an intensely thoughtful human being. And so everything that he said was fully valid. And some of his critiques, I knew in advance because as I said, like I wasn't fully going for it with those sets because then I would be absent for his sets. So I think he stepped gingerly at first, probably with the experience of having critiqued people before and have them maybe, react negatively to that. But I'm ready for people to tell me how much I suck. Because it's just like, well, I want to do better. I want to do better at making music that connects with people. And if people are put off by anything that's happening musically, then I'd appreciate knowing about it. Not that the critique is always going to be valid, right? do you ever get, do you get any criticism? Like,
no, Sue's will be we can be critical of each other.
Good. Yeah.
I feel like that's helpful for us. I feel like have figured out a constructive way to do that after shows.
Oh, isn't that the best? Like after shows, right after a show, talking about the show.
It's hard sometimes for us to stop.
Yeah, good.
That's the trick. And I think it's also like trying to create a space to also, celebrate what went right, what felt really good. Like if there were a solo that she did that I really appreciated, I wanted to know that, like how I was moved by it. And then if I feel like, oh, this thing when we tried to talk about this thing, it didn't work, or this song's not working for this reason, or just I love that kind of the deconstruction. As long as it doesn't, I feel like sometimes it gets, maybe because we're in a romantic partnership and we're fronting this band, that sometimes it's like we step into some very sensitive territory too.
I would imagine.
So just kind of having to do that and hold the space for being able to be honest with each other.
Yeah, you have these complex dynamics with each other, or that you have multiple dynamics to navigate with each other. It's quite the experience to sit and listen to your live performances, but also the records and, reading the lyrics. Sometimes I'm white knuckling it a little bit with some of the emotions that are expressed. It's no audience's terrain to navigate what's happening on the other side of the curtain. But at the same time, because I, in my way, I share these differing, I have a musical relationship with y'all and I have a personal relationship with you all. And so just hearing themes and lyrics come up, I just think, wow, how is this happening with these people? And I'll probably never know how you all feel about the lyrical content of the songs as you're performing them or as you're exploring them, but it's intense.
Yeah. speaking of lyrics on the new record, the title track has a verse inspired by a story that you told me.
Oh, really?
I remember you telling me the story because for me it's associated with this like a beautiful morning where we had breakfast at the house.
Yeah.
And we were with Calliope, our daughter, when she was just a little thing. And you had set up a little recording station, like loop station. And so you had us like make music to like soundtrack our breakfast together.
Yeah, yeah.
So it was a beautiful morning. And then you told us a story about like you had a cut on your face and you'd talked about how you'd gotten drunk and fallen down at a bonfire.
Yeah.
And then you'd been snorkeling in an Epsom salt bath to heal the wound.
Yeah.
That just gave me such an image of like you in a bathtub. I think maybe because you're an actor as well, I can kind of like picture you on the big screen, like snorkeling in a bath, like with a gash across your head.
The snorkel has never left the bathroom since then. It's still there, I guess, awaiting the next massive face laceration. There was a particular beer involved with that, and we now just call it Face Breaker.
I thought I'd sent you the lyrics and been like, just so you know, there's this reference to you.
Yeah, you may have, yeah. I'm only now beginning to experiment with actually more explicitly writing songs about people and not shying away from that idea. For a long time, it seemed important to change things enough that where I knew I was sharing something with the audience and so that it was about us. And now I feel like there are certain relationships that I understand can be sung about in a way where it's about the audience relationship to the lyric more than it is about the relationship that I'm expressing, I guess. But yeah, until then, it is like, well, yeah, you just put lots of things in there, that have personal power, and that personal power will ideally keep the song afloat without compromising a personal relationship.
I walk that line with Suze, of course, because there's this song on the new record where it's Luann is the name of the song. And at first it was Suzanne, and I just felt too weird to just sing that together.
Oh, that's cool.
I think the more I
was wondering about Luann. Yeah.
The more it became this kind of like mythological woman, or this kind of like larger than life woman that then we could both sing about.
Exactly.
And of course there are elements of us in there.
Yeah.
And elements of our relationship. And there's an honesty there, but I had to kind of like take it out of us to let that song kind of live and become its own beast.
I've never really worked like with a producer on a record, and I am always fascinated by what that relationship could be like. How long did it take, and was it a concentrated undertaking? Because I guess I'm then asking, were there times in that process where, because also sometimes in coming up with a song, as soon as it starts to work as a song, I forget that it has lyric content. And I'm just thinking like, okay, I want to bring the song to life, and I'm not worried about the lyric content anymore, to the extent that I think that it doesn't even have any. Like I could be singing in, Chinese or Estonian or something like that. And then I realize sometimes while recording or sometimes years later, oh my goodness, I can't believe I put out a song with those kinds of themes, and because there's two of you, and there are, themes that intersect with your lives at the very least. Like, were there times when you might have found yourselves overwhelmed or surprised by, even like we had a great day in the studio, not realizing that part of it was because the lyric fueled the great day, or we had a really difficult day in the studio. Like, why can't we get this take? Or why are we fighting? Or why am I not hungry? Or why do I not want to leave the studio? And it's, did the lyrics like change the atmosphere of the studio ever in unexpected ways?
That's a great question. I mean, I guess the first part I can answer more easily, and then I could dig into that. It was kind of a 10-day session, essentially.
Oh, nice. Oh, great. Wow.
And it was like, I think what was great about it too that worked so well, it was timed with like 5 days of everybody there, like the full band. And then we kind of like a slow attrition of kind of like taking one person out of the equation, kind of a more honed group to finish vocals or to kind of really just focus on the horn overdubs. And so we kind of like winnowed down the group over the course of the last 5 days. In addition to those 10 days, Susan and I had gone out to LA to do one song initially with Dan Molad, the producer, to kind of like test drive the relationship and working together.
Yeah.
And then we did one more session out in LA at the end to kind of just dig into overdubs, just the two of us, and to kind of fine a little details.
Yeah.
So not in the scheme of things 14 days, I guess, of like being in the studio, but pre-production days with the full band, like practicing the songs ahead of time, which we hadn't really done before.
Had you played those songs before? Was that like live or anything?
Yeah, but they changed dramatically once we were in the studio. I feel like the fact that you haven't really worked with a traditional producer is such an interesting thing too. It's like a testament to a lot of things that I kind of have assumed that like just the way you like do the music industry, and like somehow these like things that I've imbibed by being in this for the last 16 years. And I feel like that's always been so interesting to me when we talk, as I realize like how I'm working under these assumptions that you don't have to do it that way. I just like I forget sometimes because I just like drink the Kool-Aid. I'm like, oh yeah, you definitely need a producer. Festivals are important. You definitely need a manager. You need to tour a bunch. It needs to be these kind of venues and this like all the kind of traditional things that I'm always like amazed that you've kind of come into it and not. I feel like you don't get sucked into those trappings.
None of those make any sense to me, and so that makes it almost sometimes too much of a challenge because literally every day I wake up and I'm like, okay, what am I doing? And there's nobody to help answer that question, and no templates either. Yeah, so it's kind of exhausting at times. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like you share ownership of the record with him?
It feels like a very collaborative relationship. I feel like collective ownership. And it's interesting because he has worked on so many records and so many records since this record. And we have as well, but we also like had, because this was recorded before the pandemic, and the pandemic kind of was part of the delay for many years. It also like we built up a lot of like collective energy around this record and expectations and kind of like just putting a lot of weight, which I know is not a healthy thing, but it just has kind of taken that on.
Yeah.
And I feel like I can't imagine that he has that kind of relationship to it. That's like,
right.
He's kind of like obsessed or fretted over all these different aspects of it. Thinking about the lyrical question, I think that there was something maybe about also making the record with a group of people together, mostly all the time, like with a big group of people, and kind of having, what I loved about Dan Molad was he's such a great vocal coach.
Oh, wow.
So I feel like when I'm in the vocal booth and he's kind of coaching me through the songs and helping me with phrasing, it takes the emphasis off the lyrics in a way that I found healthy. I'm just like really trying to kind of, listen to this kind of teacher in my ear helping me guide me through the verses. And then it just sounds incredible in my headphones, and the way that they could make my voice sound back to me. It takes a little bit of the pressure off, like, oh, are these songs about us? Or like, is this too much about our emotional kind of life on display for everybody here?
I'm really jealous about that aspect. I did a session a few weeks ago, and the idea of the session was, Shahzad?
By name, but not...
So Shahzad and I have worked together, and he recently had maybe an encounter or more than one encounter with the drummer Jim Keltner. Mm-hmm. And he contacted me and said, oh, I've had these wonderful experiences with Jim Keltner, and I just feel like you'd appreciate it. And, if you ever would want to set up a session, I said, okay, well, where would we be? And he said, Los Angeles is where he lives, and he's 80, so it's Los Angeles. And we were going to go to Los Angeles during our daughter's spring break. And so set up a session. It was great. It was interesting, but again, like the Jonathan Richman thing, my focus is on a lot of different things. It was a novel experience in many ways, really so much to observe. But I knew going in, I wasn't going to get upset about anything. I was there for a particular reason, like with the Jonathan Richman tour. If on the Jonathan Richman tour, if we had a terrible show, I wouldn't care because that wasn't why I was there. I was there to see Jonathan. So I wasn't, worried about it. But then when I left, I was thinking the one thing that I wish that I'd had was a vocal coach. I'm glad to hear that this fella that's within his wheelhouse, because that's what I would love. I know that I can sing and do sing in all different ways, but I don't always feel like I have control over what voice is going to come out of me.
Wow.
I'm trying to learn a little bit of Alexander technique, and part of that is learning to understand what's going to come out of you, whether it's a movement or, in my case, I'm thinking about vocal delivery, because I have these different voices, and I'm like, well, why did I go in the studio, and where was that voice? The closest I ever got was when we were recording the Greatest Palace Music record, and I was trying to do New Partner, and I couldn't figure it out. And so I overdubbed a vocal. I'd done all the other voices live, and then that one, David Berman came in, and I was like, help me, coach me. And he coached me like an acting coach. He gave me a character from which, but that's also interesting because in listening to the record and following along the lyric sheet, which was a wonderful experience, like I haven't sat down with a record in a long time, partly because we don't necessarily have access to records with lyric sheets, new records with lyric sheets, with people singing, especially singing lyrics that are an integral part of the song. A lot of people, they're musicians and they make great songs, but then they'll say, okay, now I have to come up with some lyrics. And it's just not an important part of the song. which is the opposite of how I approach a song.
Same.
So sitting like I was 15 and like following along with every lyric on your record. And there were 3 or 4 times when I was kind of pleasantly stunned by the phrasing and just watching the words and seeing how you were able to, dance with the syllables.
Thanks for saying that. I mean, all of that comes together also. Suze is kind of like in that role most of the time with me, kind of as a vocal coach and like helping me with, she's so attuned to phrasing more than kind of where I'm like obsessing over the lyrics. So it kind of gets to go through that filter, and then to kind of have her in the room with someone who's like so specialized at that, or that's one of his gifts as a producer.
As cohabitating collaborators, do you all have set times? Do you have a scheduled work day usually at all? No,
we don't. Our life is so free form. And the nature of having kids, the nature of, I think Suze would say just having a bipolar brain, there's just like an element of, I think I've had to learn in our relationship to be open to how the day unfolds and to how she's feeling and kind of what she feels capable of, and like how the day's shape is going to kind of take place, and to really be open to that and not get too hung up on, this was important to me that we do this thing today, or this had to happen. And I've just had to, just be open to her needs, the needs of the kids. We're getting ready for tour now. So there's like that. It's helpful for us to have outside pressure. That's kind of like, we really need we're going to go to do this radio thing and we're going to have to play this live. So to kind of have a way to focus our energy. That's why I've always loved like having recording dates on the calendar to help me finish songs. I love imposing structure on my structureless life.
It's crucial. Yeah. Thankfully school helps a little bit with that for the kids. How'd you come across that producer fella?
We've worked with a lot of great producers, but just a real music fan of ours, a musician, Mike's from Tall Tall Trees. He plays with Kishibashi, and we were just hanging out backstage, and after one of their shows, and he said, "Oh, do you know Dan Milad? Like, I think he'd be a great producer, fit for you guys." And he like really knows our records well, has seen our live show. Like, I thought, he means that in a real thoughtful. He's not just throwing that out.
Yeah, I saw that he's part of the Lucius experience, which is a very compelling experience, I have to say. Yeah,
since the beginning. And integral collaborator and producer in the early days of their first records and stuff.
I was looking at their like Wikipedia description, and it kind of blew my mind, because in the course of describing, their musical biography includes like what songs were placed in what season of what shows, like what episodes of what seasons of what shows. And that really blew my mind, like thinking, people, that's really important to that specifically is important, which is cool, because to me, that's the reason I would say no to most of those placements. It's because I wouldn't want it in that episode of that season of that show. But it's interesting that that's like sort of a badge of honor for some musicians.
I heard one of your songs in the Val Kilmer documentary, right?
Yeah.
And then which made a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
And then at the end of True Detective, one of the episodes, there was that song. How did the True Detective one come about? Or
tons of people had seen the first season of that show and found it to be, novel and challenging and a lot of fun, and sometimes upsetting and sometimes a little hokey. But one of my best pals is a gentleman named David Ferguson, who lives in Nashville. He's a musician and producer in Nashville, and he's friends with T-Bone Burnett. He called me one day and said, I was playing golf with T-Bone, and he said they're working on a True Detective and they really wants you to do something for the next season. So I think I texted T-Bone and I said, "This is Will Oldham." He said, "Hi, how are you?" "I'm fine. Ferg said that I should hit you up." And so, he was like, well, can you come down to Nashville next week? And it was a neat experience, because just got to go to Ferg's studio then, which was the Butcher Shop, which has since been torn down with the infinite expansion of Nashville. And Ferg shared the studio with John Prine, co-owned the studio with Ferg. And John had a writing room like in the back of the studio with a little pool table. And that's where I went and set up in Prine's room, which was, of course, daunting and exciting. And then the bizarre T-Bone Burnett, came into the room, and I had said, like, what should I do to prepare? Should I bring anything? He said, no, I've got some ideas. We'll just work it out when you get here. So I got there, and he like showed me a Skip James tuning, and then he showed me like a lookbook for a show that he was maybe developing with the Coen brothers about maybe the jazz scene in New York in the late 1950s or something like that. And then he's like, okay, well, I'm going to just go in the other room and you just do your stuff. And I was like, what are you talking about? So he left the room, and fortunately I had brought some notebooks, and I was, in good enough songwriter shape to just sit there and come up with something that I could then play for him in 30 or 40 minutes. And that was and then we went into the studio the next day. I think at Ferg's house that night, it's like, what have I got myself into? And there was a documentary about, this weird contrived session called the New Basement Tapes. It was just Bob Dylan's crew trying to find ways to wring more money out of the gullible audience that he's developed over the years. But it was a documentary about the studio session. And so I could watch T-Bone produce a session, essentially. That was very helpful, like in terms of creating expectations and helping me go into the studio, not just flying blind, I guess, the next day.
One of the things I just marvel at with kind of following your career is this thing that I talked about earlier, where it's like you've kind of you like don't accept this, here's the way you're supposed to have a music career, and you kind of have done your own thing, and then I don't know, people still find you find kind of these incredible collaborations.
Yeah.
Like, I just like, it's incredible. It's like, and I think, I mean, from the outside as a fan of your music, it's like, well, there's just something, like authentic about your way of being in the world that I think resonates for people. And that comes through in the art.
There were wonderful and sustaining things that happened. Like, that was sustaining in a variety of ways. And, the Val Kilmer thing, or talking to June Tabor on the phone yesterday. But if I were to involve myself, I guess, with certain aspects of the music business, that takes brain space, right? And so since I don't allot the brain space to some of those things, I stay in a zone that I think is also more useful to people than if I didn't. And as an introvert who loves other people and loves being with other people and working with other people, but is just, socially inadequate and live, excessively in my own head. So to try to think, well, what kind of utility can I be to other people? And if I can stay connected in certain ways that are, valuable, and disconnected in other ways that aren't valuable, then I can function as kind of like this, essence or, So like the Val Kilmer, they were like, well, we want to, put this, I am a cinematographer at the end of this Val Kilmer movie. And Val Kilmer is somebody that I've been thinking about, again, since I was about 14, since Top Secret was on repeat on my grandmother's cable TV. And I was able to say, well, that's cool, but, could I re-record the song for this? And for a variety of reasons, partly because I live to work and I live to collaborate, and just the challenge of redoing that song for this specific context was really exciting. And also just knowing, that we're watching Val Kilmer age and then wanting to present this similar sort of juxtaposition of youth in the composition of the song and age in the performance of the song. And then, oftentimes we sit in our bedrooms or walk down the street and we think like, if only I could do this thing, if only I could sing with this person or write for this person. And then it so rarely happens, but then sometimes it does happen. And you think like, well, if I'm not ready to do that, then I'm not worth anything. We have on our wall like this painted on metal in monochromatic and neon orange, a portrait of Mark Twain that Val Kilmer sent as a thank you. And that's just like, that's what this was all about. Like getting this neon orange portrait of Mark Twain painted on galvanized steel to hang on the wall of our house and complete a kind of a circle.
Did you have mentors, or did you have models of people that were living that way that you saw that you were like, I'm going to choose to focus on these things and not get kind of, these other things that don't make sense to me or they don't inspire me?
It's crucial to my history and my makeup that I grew up when I did, where I did, because there were these things happening in Louisville, Kentucky when I was a teenager. Musically, the music scene was wonderful and creative and supportive. And I was watching older who were leaving, going to college when I was just starting to go to shows, but who's, within the scene, they were heroes, but you could also see them and talk to them. And then similarly, there was the theater here, Actors Theater of Louisville, which was kind of in its prime at that time. And I grew up with watching these actors on stage who were absolutely amazing and were my hero. They were my heroes, and they were so fulfilling to me. And I was a kid, but I could see people in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s going to these plays, not going to the punk shows, but going to the plays and being significantly affected and moved and changed by what they were seeing, and that some of these actors were big figures in our community. I grew up fortunate to just say, like, these things can happen within arm's reach.
Mm. And maybe also why you were able to kind of imagine a life in Louisville as an artist and staying there?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and seeing, as much celebration as there is, say, of like certain aspects of a New York scene in the 1970s in rock and roll and art music, things like that. I'm not certain that I see, even among heroes like the Ramones, that you saw an evolution or a development that we can look up to and say, like, I really want, I'm really looking to sort of do what the Ramones did with their 13th record. I'm not trying to do that. I can barely get through the Ramones' 13th record. The well runs dry at a certain point if you don't have access to human beings, kind of like, or a community that's not just a music business community or a show business community. The music stops being interesting, or the movies, or whatever people are trying to create. If you're trying to live, that should be reflected in your music, and not separating yourself from anything, from anything that the audience is going to need to sustain ourselves as as audiences.
Yeah, I mean, that resonates for me in terms of just, not that I felt disconnected from that or had totally lost sight of it before the pandemic, but I think for us there was this sense when all the touring disappeared and we were kind of at home and we started trying to figure out how we were going to survive. And it started first with live streams, and when we weren't doing a live stream, we were doing like a private Zoom concert for fans of ours. And this one fan reached out to us and kind of like offered to help us in some way. And eventually it became this kind of, he was this catalyst to like start this fundraising campaign with our fans and raise this money to build this barn studio that I'm now recording in this conversation in.
Yeah.
And to like be like, oh yeah, there is this, like, all these people that have been supporting us. And we were kind of like, I don't know, I felt like we were kind of, not that we were flailing before the pandemic, but there was a sense we were just like following all the steps that everybody was telling us to do. And at the core of that was still just, the relationships with the people that were kind of, who were involved and invested in our music and supporting us and connecting with it.
Yeah.
It was so nebulous, but there was just like having this one guy that was like, all right, everybody that really believes in this band, let's all come together and help them out.
That's incredible. That's like a Frank Capra scene, right?
Yeah, it's happening right now.
This is your life, but they aligned because you focused so much energy at different times in your day, at different times in your night, at different times in your life. And if that didn't happen, then life would be impossible and unbearable. And so it could, it's completely unpredictable, but that kind of had to happen in order for life to be a sustainable, and music to be a sustainable thing, right?
Yeah.
You see it sometimes happen where somebody gets a stroke of what looks like good fortune from the outside, but because the preparation wasn't there, it doesn't necessarily lead to something fruitful, or, it can even be tragic at times. But in your case, things are happening in your wake as you go from city to city. It doesn't just end. You did something. You made an impression on people in so many ways, and that is continuing to work in your quote unquote absence.
And we've been doing these blindfolded shows, and we've kind of been taking it to different places, but now we've been able to do them in our barn.
Yeah.
And it's been, I don't know if you'll have any time when you're coming through Charlottesville, if it's going to be part of a tour, but at some point I really want you to be part of one of these blindfolded shows.
That would be amazing.
It's all acoustic. The performers move around during the show.
Yeah.
So people in the audience are like hearing it, they just haven't really heard people play in that way, to play totally acoustically and to move while they're blindfolded.
Right.
And the acoustics are really incredible in here.
My friend Emmett Kelly and I did a tour in the Netherlands 6 or 7 years ago, I think, where we played in small churches with, maybe 100 capacity churches, with the idea that we wouldn't have to use any sort of amplification or microphones, and that we could be anywhere in the room at any time. At any time, we could be anywhere in the room and the show would still be happening. And, also with the idea that fantasy would be, whether or not the audience had ever thought about it, that it would be something that fulfilled them. like in theater, if you're in the front row of a black box theater and somebody is performing a scene 3 to 4 feet in front of you, there's kind of nothing like the effect that has on you emotionally. And it doesn't happen enough musically, especially by, yourselves or myself, who have, you can say, achieved, anyone can play to 5 people, right? Anyone can play to 20 people. How do you still balance, like, well, how small can you keep the audience so that you can explore this direct effect and still sustain a life in music? Because it's not financially sustainable to play to 100 people on tour every night, or 50 people, or 20 people, even as it's emotionally and musically challenging and inspiring.
That's what I think this experience of doing these shows, I really feel like I'm in it as a performer in a different way, because I think I just feel like, oh yeah, I'm performing just to this person here. Yeah. They're not even looking at me, but I just feel like almost like I'm an invisible presence right next to them, singing to them.
Yeah.
I think for me, I step into like persona performance role so much when I'm on stage in the outfits, and like everybody's looking at me, and I start, like putting on a show.
Right.
But yeah, it's just one thing that back to the human to human connection.
Yeah.
When you're just singing to someone that close. Oh, I can't wait for you to be part of one of these. And it's great to get to reconnect here. I can't wait to see you here when you come back through.
Yeah.
Charlottesville, or next time we're in Louisville.
Yeah.
We've loved playing there over the years, so we'll hopefully get back soon.
Excellent.
Awesome. Great to see you, Will.
Good to see you, David.
Thanks for listening to the Talkhouse Podcast, and thanks to David Wax and Will Oldham for chatting. If you liked what you heard, please follow Talkhouse on your favorite podcasting platform, and check out all the great written pieces we've got on talkhouse.com. This episode was produced by Myron Kaplan, and the Talkhouse theme is composed and performed by The Range. See you next time.